One of the most important traits a dude can have is courage, and it's lacking today. We desperately need courage. But something I don't hear talked about very often, and something that's absolutely critical, is how do you build courage? I'm joined today by Jeff Struecker, a military legend. He was there in the Battle of Mogadishu, Somalia, the whole Black Hawk Down stuff, Ranger Hall of Famer, and he's going to be hanging out with us, coaching us through it. Also in this episode, we have a major announcement. We're going to talk about a recent shooting in a Christian school. We have our Q and ambush section. We have our shameless plug. We have our training tip. We have our dad joke stuff. Lots to cover, but first, a story that makes me look terrible. I was going bungee jumping in high school, and my buddy got up on this platform all hooked in, and he just holds out his arms and does this beautiful swan dive, holds it all the way down. And I watch my buddy and I'm like, that's going to be me. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to swan out and just perfection go down. But as I climbed the rungs of this never-ending ladder, I got to this massive precipice and I'm looking down and everything looks very small. I realized, wow, young teenage John hasn't built adequate courage. I was shaking. I'm talking to this dude up there and he's trying to coach me to the ledge and I'm just kind of I'm all locked up. I can't really do the thing. And so now the idea of just doing this perfect swan dive free fall, that idea is completely gone. And now I'm just figuring out, how do I get down from the platform without jumping to my inevitable death? The guy ended up kind of like tricking me to get toward, like, baby steps. What about Bob, to the edge of the platform? And then he has me like lean out against his arm. And so I'm doing this kind of thing. And he's like, all right, on the count of three. I'm like, wait, no, can we go five? And already he's at three. And now I'm falling down and I'm doing one of those like Arnold Schwarzenegger explosion where you're climbing through the air. Like it's all ugly. It's like, no, doing one of those. And I didn't do the beautiful swan dive. I had not built adequate courage. I wish I had watched the episode that you're about to see right now, so Ranger buddy Jeff Struecker can square us away. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. This is episode 4 of The John Lovell Show. So ordinarily we bury our shameless plug somewhere in the meat of the content. However, I know Jeff and I are going to get into it. I want to interrupt that flow. So we're going to do our shameless plug right now.
It's time to do the shameless plug. And you know what? I don't even have to say it this week, John. We've actually got it recorded. So here you go. Shameless plug.
Major announcement, guys. I have written a book. It's The Warrior Poet Way. This is it. It has been years in the making, and I didn't want to say anything until I actually had something in hand. It releases July 11th, and it's all the most important lessons I can think of for living free and dying well. It is our ethos crystallized, and in it, I really jump in to stories from my past, from connections that I've made, stuff that is highly personal that I've held back over the years because I wanted a place to put it in one big tell-all kind of narrative. I think even if you're a non-reader, you would enjoy this book. Blurbs are out. John Eldredge said it, if you want someone to shoot straight with you about masculinity, life, death, and what matters most, read this book. Stephen Mansfield, New York Times bestselling author, says, I'm weary to my core with airy books on manhood that offer untested theories and unlived philosophies. In The Warrior Poet Way, you smell the sweat and feel the acrid bite of gunpowder on each page because John has lived his words and offers what he has found to those he hopes will become his brothers in arms. Get this book, read it, and live it fiercely. Stephen Mansfield. Guys, it's available for pre-order right now on all the places where books are sold. Go ahead, rush the door, get it, really appreciate it. All right, guys, welcome back. As promised, Jeff Struecker, retired Army Ranger, is joining us in studio. I'm going to read his bio, and then we'll welcome Jeff in. Jeffrey Struecker is a decorated retired Army Ranger who was involved in the Battle of Mogadishu in 1993, so that's Black Hawk Down stuff, the 1989 invasion of Panama, Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm, and global war on terrorism. In 2017, he was inducted into the U.S. Army Ranger Hall of Fame, which is awesome. He spent most of his Army career in the 75th Ranger Regiment, competed in and won the Best Ranger competition in 1996. Jeff spent his final years in the Army serving as a chaplain in airborne and Ranger units. Struecker has co-authored 5 published books. He holds a doctorate of philosophy from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Good job, man. Holy cow. He is an award-winning author with several books in print. Jeff Struecker leads the Unbeatable Army podcast and pastors Two Cities Church in Columbus, Georgia. I thought my resume was okay. Heath, my resume.
Need to do a little bit more? Can you step it up a little bit? Yeah.
Holy smokes. Hey, Jeff, thanks so much for tuning in, man.
John, it's great to be with you, man. It's been a while since you and I had a chance to talk with one another.
It certainly has. And you just got back from an international trip, I understand, right?
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time over in Africa, beating my body up and trying to see how tough I was.
And how'd that come out? Tell us what you were doing.
I did a race called the Munga, subtitled The Toughest Race on Earth, and it didn't go the way I wanted it to. The bottom line is I scratched and didn't finish at about the 500-mile mark. And I still got a little bit of numbness and tingling because of this race a few months ago.
Man, I wish I could have come. Our producer went and some of our video guys, because we recorded the entire thing for our network. Holy cow, wish you could have been there cheering you on. I heard it was absolutely brutal. So party on.
I got everything I was asking for. I wanted a tough race. I got everything I was asking for and then some.
So I wanted to start by bringing up a story. I want to see if you remember this, because as your bio said, you were a chaplain. After you were a door kicker in Somalia and other places, you became a chaplain. I want to hear that story, by the way. But you came to me as a chaplain at 2nd Ranger Battalion. And so right before we did this mission, the chaplain, Jeff Struecker, legend of Black Hawk Down, comes out and says a prayer. Do you already know where I'm going with this?
I know exactly what you're talking about. People still email me about this prayer.
Oh, anyway, we all bowed our heads and we're ready. All right, chaplain, you do your thing. It's nighttime, so we're all flipping nods up, waiting for your prayer. And I don't remember the opening, but I remember one part of it where you said, And God, may we bathe in the blood of our enemies tonight. And and at this point, an eye pops open and you look around and everyone's looking around. I've got atheists, sadists around being like, yeah, all of a sudden they're ready to follow. And so they just needed the right chaplain prayer. Do you remember that prayer?
I remember it distinctly. We were in Afghanistan, just getting ready to go on target. And a little bit of background, I had been back and forth with you to Iraq and Afghanistan a whole bunch by this point.
Yeah.
I had been studying through and reading through the book of Psalms in the Bible on my own time. And I was thinking, when I listen to some of the prayers that David prayed in the book of Psalms, and then the prayers that I pray in Afghanistan and Iraq, they don't sound the same. I'm going to try this. I tried it one time and people were like, what the heck was that? And like I said, they still email me about that prayer. Quick aside, John, I realized very quickly, I don't think we were ready for that one. I'll just tuck that one away until another day.
I read Psalm 139 last night. And to your point, holy cow, David was, loving the Lord, worshiping, and stacking bodies of Philistia of holy cow. So I don't know. It definitely raised some eyebrows.
Yeah, it raised an eyebrow or two.
I shared a really silly kind of story. I didn't want to do the whole war story kind of thing because you would outdo me and make me look like a chump.
No, man.
I wanted you to take us back to some of your scary moments where young Sergeant Struecker is developing courage, and what that process looks. So take us back to 93 Somalia and anywhere you want to go, but what's been your journey regarding courage?
Yeah, well, like you, I showed up at in the Ranger Regiment as a private, and I had a very strong faith system before I joined the Army. And in the Ranger Regiment, you're gonna do a lot of very difficult stuff, but you're also going to do a lot of dangerous stuff. And I have to remind guys today that before Iraq and Afghanistan, far more Rangers died in training than they did in combat. So every day when you went to work, you knew, man, I could get on we could be doing something dangerous today and I may not make it home. My first firefight was in Panama. And I was way up on a mountaintop next to the Costa Rican border. First time bullets were flying over my head and I was engaging the enemy. I had a Grenada Ranger right next to me. And that Grenada Ranger was kind of narrating for me what a firefight was like. Like, hey, Jeff, here's what the enemy's doing. Here's what I want you to do next. I want you to prepare for this. And it occurred to me, that dude was totally calm and I was freaking out on the inside. I was trying to look like I had it all together, but I was freaking out on the inside. And after the firefight was over with, I remember asking this guy, became a sergeant major. His name was Bobby Lane. And I asked him about this firefight. And he's like, Jeff, my first firefight in Grenada, I had a Vietnam Ranger right next to me doing the same thing for me that I did for you. And when my guys were getting ready to go to Somalia, I saw the look in their eyes as we were preparing to load the aircraft. And they had that same bewildered and a little bit terrified look. And I decided I'm going to do for these guys in Somalia what Bobby Lane did for me in Panama, and just try to help them work their way through it and let them know I'm going to be right there with you every second of the battle. You don't have to worry because I'm going to be there with you. And I've been through this a time or two. And that's my first real experience with the physical fear and the courage that it takes to confront the enemy in combat. But there, as you know, John, lots of different kinds of fears and lots of different kinds of courage out there.
Which I would definitely want to talk to. Can you drill down and be as practical as possible? What does it look like going from super scared to calm? I saw the bookends. I saw the beginning process.
Sure.
Step one, I am just trying to hold on to what's in my bowels. And step two, I'm calm, cool, collected Jeff Struecker stacking bodies in the streets of Mogadishu. What happens in between, you know?
Yeah. What looks like calm, cool, and collective is really totally terrified on the inside, but you've got a couple of skills to help you mitigate the terror, to help you put it in its proper place so that you can function effectively on the battlefield and so that the guys around you don't get killed because you're losing control. And that doesn't happen overnight. I really think dangerous, realistic combat training prepares a person for what you'll see in war. But I've always said you can never really predict how that guy or gal is going to respond the first time the bullets fly over your head. And usually it's the people around them when the bullets are flying over everyone's head that will make the biggest impact on how they react to that first enemy contact, especially when you think the next bullet's going to hit me right between the eyes and I'm not going to see it coming. So right. I think it takes time, and it has to be developed through training, developed through being around some people that have been through it a time or two.
Got it.
Because it's very unnatural to go into combat with bullets landing all around you, guys dropping to your left and to your right, and pretend like you're not affected by that. In fact, I would say there's something psychologically wrong with a guy or gal on the battlefield who doesn't feel fear in those moments. You just have to learn how to master it.
You had mentioned there's scary stuff outside of bullets flying. That's not very relatable to a lot of the folks tuning in. You know, they're not running through third world countries with people shooting at them. What moments in your life have been extremely scary that were outside of a combat zone?
I don't consider myself an expert in very much. Got a lot of education, did a lot of reading, but the two things that I have spent most of my adult life around is death and fear. Not just my own, but the others around me. I spent almost my entire adult life in those two worlds. And I've noticed that fear and its antidote, faith and courage, it really comes in three sources. You have physical courage. That means the ability to get up and to physically confront your fears. Take, for example, Batman's fear of bats, and I've got to overcome that fear and actually turn that fear into an asset. That's a really simple example. You've got moral courage, And I really think that moral courage may be the hardest of the three, because moral courage is when you stand your ground and you know that what you're being asked to do is not right, and you stand up and you speak out anyway. And usually moral courage happens when no one else around you is willing to stand up and speak out. So not only are you facing real challenges, but you're almost doing it by yourself. And then the third, and when people think through it, maybe you've had an example of this or a time or two in your life, and this is what I call spiritual courage or courage of faith, that you're going to hold on to something that is really valuable and you believe in deeply, even when people around you are questioning it, even when people around you are calling you crazy for holding on to those beliefs. All three of those kind of have their same, all three of those fears and all three of those sources of courage are similar, but it takes very, very strong character to handle any one of or all three of those.
You know, you mentioned different types of courage in like the public square, for instance, the moral courage. And I feel all the time of like, hey, you can't say that. Or
Right.
what if I say that and I'll risk career or cancellation and things like that. And I think many years ago, I really valued intelligence. I'm like, man, I want to follow the smart people because surely they've got
Right.
it all figured out. And I think as of late, smart is less important and courageous and moral are more important. But I think what I'm thirsty for more than anything, looking for public people, personalities out there, is I want people who are smart, but virtuous and brave. And to find that trinity together is extremely difficult. The world is full of so many people that are smart, but they aren't necessarily good, and then they're not brave. Do you have any kind of dudes that you're looking to, guys or girls out there that are just really doing a good job in those three areas of like thought leadership?
Yeah, sure. I totally agree, by the way. There's no question that if you got a little bit of street smarts, you're going to go farther than the guy or gal that spent a lot of time in the books. But let's just be honest, in the information age that we live in, anyone can Google any answer to any problem tomorrow. So just being smart is not good enough anymore.
Right.
And we live in a world where this culture swings from left to right at an insane rate, which means you really are going to have to be the kind of guy or gal that stands your ground, that draws a line in the sand, that holds on to your convictions, because if not, the winds of change are going to blow around you every day. And if you look at the politicians, even if you look at business leaders, and unfortunately some military leaders, you see them flipping sides and changing opinions and swaying with the culture. And then you're right. The thing that really makes somebody worthy of following is that they're noble or they have this honorable character. And we live in an age where honor is really, really rare. So this may surprise you. Some of the heroes that I look up to, and I use this word hero on purpose because I really believe they're courageous, are the guys that are able to stay at home and keep their marriage together and hang with their families, even when they want to go out and have an affair, even when they're having troubles in the marriage, even when everything around them is pulling them away. But they stay in there and they do it day after day after day. There's some ladies that are trying to hold the family together, single moms that are working 2 jobs and trying to hold it all together and trying to be a good example for their children, even though the guy in the family bolted on them. And I think to myself, you know, what I saw on battlefields is moments of courage. What this lady or this guy I'm describing is doing is they're showing courage moment after moment, day after day, month after month, year after year. And when you put that together, man, that is a lot more courage to just remain consistent for decades than to show a little bit of courage in the middle of sheer terror on a battlefield for a few seconds.
Yeah, strangely enough, it is a lot easier to die for a cause than to really live for one.
Man, that is powerful right there. You're absolutely right.
Very good. Hey, I want to take some of the stuff that you said, because you've already led us down a path into some really good stuff. I want to back up and as good as we can and as practically as we can unpack of like, all right, I'm here. I'm a fearful guy. I know I should be brave. How in the world do I get from where I'm at to where I want to be?
Yeah, I want to go back to a little bit of my story. So that first firefight that I'm in the invasion of Panama back in Just Cause in '89, I'm totally terrified. I don't even think I really understood what was happening around me because so much stuff is going off all at the same time. And then I go to Kuwait about a year and a half later, and I'm in a firefight with 1st Ranger Battalion over in Kuwait on the Iraqi border in Desert Storm. And now I'm starting to recognize more stuff happening around me. And I think those were the things that prepared me for Somalia. So by the time that I go over to Somalia with Bravo Company, 3rd Ranger Battalion, this is not my first rodeo. In fact, by the time I'm 24, I have been to combat more than guys that have been in the Army for 20 years, literally. And the first night that we get off of the aircraft, literally, we get off of a giant C-5 and take over a hangar on the airfield. And we haven't been on the airfield for more than 2 hours when we start to get hit by rockets and mortars. Everybody is scurrying around. Everyone is going crazy. But I've been under mortar fire before. I've been under direct fire before. So I'm able to really think about what's happening, process all of the information around me a little bit different. And John, not once, but every single night you could set your watch to it almost to the moment at 2000 hours, we knew we were going to get rocketed. We were going to get mortared on the airfield. And after weeks or months of that, it started to become an event. You don't ever take that for granted because the shrapnel could kill you. But it started to become an event that was a little bit more easy to deal with. I'll fast forward. I'm in Afghanistan, my first deployment over there, and I get rocketed. I counted the number of times, 170 different rocket attacks over there. And the guys around me are scurrying like crazy, and they're running to the bunkers, and they're hiding. And I'm like, you know what? That rocket is so far away, I don't even think I'm going to bother to put on my boots right now. I'm not at all worried about this rocket attack. And people are thinking, Jeff, I think you're a little bit crazy. You've lost your mind. No, I've just been rocketed enough that I know when it's time to put my helmet and my boots on and go to the bunker. And right now, I'm not at all worried. And I think what I'm trying to say to the listening audience right now is it is built over time, and courage always builds on itself. But if you're not careful, fear builds on itself. Courage spreads like it spreads from one person to the next, but fear does the same thing. So it ultimately starts with one person and deep in the heart, and then it spreads from the heart to the person next to you and the person next to you. Fear can sweep through a unit or a family in the middle of a crisis, just like courage can, and it's built over time.
So what I'm hearing you say is, one, if you're afraid of stuff, subjecting yourself to that scary thing over and over is going to build repetition, and like any muscle that gets stronger with use, being afraid more often can help you kind of neutralize that. It's not such a humongous thing because you're around it a good bit. So maybe if I was extrapolating that even farther and looking for a nugget of like, it is possible in our day and age to live this insulated, crazy, comfortable life where you just go to work and you come home in your air-conditioned vehicle surrounded by airbags and park your car, you go in, you watch whatever streaming service you got, and you eat food, and you just kind of zone out for hours and hours. And really, you can insulate yourself from almost any type of pain or any type of danger. And it's not natural. And I think the world, which does have a lot of fearful things and scary things in it, when you're confronted outside of your little bubble and you run into anything scary, we're less and less able to deal with that. So we need to put ourselves out of our comfort zone and find scary things to do, right? You just went over to South Africa, and you're not a spring chicken anymore, right?
Thanks for reminding me.
And you're still doing hard, scary stuff, you know?
I think you nailed it. I don't think you run out and you go try to find scary stuff. I think you inherently are afraid of a few what ifs or a few things in your life that you're not sure they're going to turn out the way you want them to. And when you find those fears, you deliberately face those fears. You do it delicately, building step by step on a little bit more courage today than you had yesterday and a little bit more courage tomorrow than you had today. But the fears that you know you're struggling with, and let's just be honest, every human on the planet has some persistent fears. You get up and you face them, and you find that tomorrow it's a little bit easier to face those fears. And the day after tomorrow, it's a little bit easier. And then pretty soon, it looks like you're not afraid at all. You still are. You've just figured out how to deal with the fear, how to face the fear. I like to use this language, how to go forward in the middle of fear instead of running away from it.
For me, you know, of like heights don't bother me anymore, and some type of fights or getting attacked. And I mean, not that I'm completely numb to all that. It's just not this huge threat in my mind anymore. But what still does bother me is, the things that I can't say and risking relationships. You're a pastor. And so what can't you say from the pulpit? Of like, and that's the scary thing of like, what are all those hot topic issues? I remember I was visiting a church considering on whether my wife and I would go there or not. And the abortion ban from the Supreme Court had just passed. And it was crickets that Sunday, right after the Sunday. They said nothing.
Right.
And then the next week, nothing. And I'm like, how do you not celebrate that from the pulpit?
Right.
And I was thinking, I think maybe they were afraid to. What would people say regarding issues of sexuality or gender confusion or calling out any sin that the world has embraced? Of like, can you call that out? Do you still do? Of like, I don't think we need to run and jump off, precipices to bungee jump or skydive, though I hope folks out there do that because it's all building courage. Find anything scary and do it. And when you're working on some of it, you are working on all of it because fear is fear and courage is courage. So I want people to do, whatever's scary, but we don't have to look very far because all these social issues, all the political correct muzzles, all the fear of ostracization and attack and cancellation, you don't have to go anywhere far before you run into that scary thing. And I wonder, what is the scarier thing? For me, that's the scarier thing, I think.
Yeah, John, you just gave great advice to all of the listeners out there. Look, standing up against this tide of culture takes real courage because, let's be honest, what are people going to say? How are they going to treat me if I say something that they don't like? And it may be hard for some listeners to understand, why would bungee jumping have any relevance on standing up against the tide of culture? Well, courage is courage. Fear is fear. It doesn't recognize a different aspect of life. So there are some times when you can remind yourself, you know what? I was really afraid standing on the edge of that bungee platform, and I took the plunge anyway. And if I had the courage to take that plunge, I'm now standing on the edge of this cultural chaos around me. And I feel like I've got to say something. And I'm about to step off of the edge, and it feels terrifying. But if I had the courage to jump off that bungee platform, here we go. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to speak my mind. I'm going to show moral courage. And that physical courage in the past gave you the strength to show some moral courage in the future, or even spiritual courage down the road.
Guys, if you're listening on podcast or watching on YouTube, that's the end of the show for you today. We're going to continue our chat with Jeff Struecker amongst all the other stuff we'll talk about in this show. Make sure you check out watchwpsn.com to see the rest of this episode. If you enter in code JLSHOW to give you a nice discount, watchwpsn.com to sign up, and then you can download the app wherever apps are distributed, or App Store.
Available.
Available?
Yeah, that works.
There you go. You can do that. Guys, see ya.
The most intense moments of a firefight in my life was, without question, in the city streets of Somalia. I'm surrounded by 1,000 armed Somalis, and most of them are 10 feet away from me.